Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn, this is Orna Ross, and we're here for the Self-Publishing Advanced Salon for the Alliance of Independent Authors, and this is the August, I think, 2017 show. Yay! Hello Orna, how are you today?
I'm really good. She was saying that she couldn't remember what we were called because we keep changing our name, but she made it. She does remember.
Yes, and I think, but it's a good thing to talk about up front, because the Alliance actually has now organised the different podcasts that are available for people. Do you want to just maybe talk about that? Because, you know, we used to try and cover everything, but now it's been split up.
Yeah, and I think it's a measure of where self-publishing is at, which is kind of our theme for the show this week, about how things are bedding down and settling down and kind of stratifying and breaking off into strands. So yeah, we used to do the, it wasn't called a Salon then, I can't remember what it was called, but we used to first answer members' questions at one stage, and we had insight seminars and so on with various experts and blah, blah, blah. What we found was that the advice, general advice, is almost useless now. Self-publishing advice needs to be tailored. So we have now got 4 shows a month, essentially 1 a week. 1 for beginners, which Jay Artale and Michael Laron are doing. So that is very much focusing on people who are just getting started. They tend to be writers who know that they want to make a living at this. They're not people who are just writing for family and friends. So there may be a few of those on board, but they are all very much at the beginning stages. And then we have Debbie and David, Debbie Young and David Penny, both team members, who are answering our members' questions each month. And that can be across the board. It can be at any level. But again, the questions tend to be, in general, more towards the sort of beginning, emerging indie than the more advanced. And then you and me are going to be talking about things, really running an indie author business, the kind of stuff that comes up when you are making money, but you know, you want to grow and expand and do better and, you know, take things further. So we're calling it the Advanced Salon, and that allows us to also look more widely at the indie world and the trends that are happening in publishing, trade publishing as well. And then we use, for the 4th, and if there's a 5th week in the month, we highlight one of our fringe sessions. And so, yeah, it's turned into a weekly podcast, which is great.
Yeah, and I think the development of this, you know, what this is and also what the Alliance is, kind of mirrors the development of what happens to most writers. And so let's kind of, you know, before we get into all the other stuff, let's just talk about that stratification, because one of the things that I've been noticing, and you have too, is that the indie world is almost ending up a bit, you know, like the mid-list. There are very few people at the very top who are making 7 figures, 8 figures, similar to traditional publishing, you know, big names, making big money. Then there are kind of the debut, the kind of new authors, where if you've only got 1 book, either like in traditional publishing, they put a load of money behind you and see what hits the wall. And that's the same with indie. Like, some indies do hit on their first book, but it's very rare. And then to be a successful mid-list writer, whether you're indie or trad, you almost need multiple books. Well, you do need multiple books and other streams of income. So, you know, is that how you're feeling? How do you feel it's settling down?
Yeah, I think that's a really good kind of summation of what's happening. And this is the part that excites me and always did. You know, this was the thing that I saw first when I self-published myself for the very first time. It was like, oh, wow, you know, you can build a business here like you can in any other field. It's not about the outliers who make, you know, as you said, 6 or 7 figures or more, you know. It's about the fact that if you're serious about your writing, you can actually get in there into that mid-list area, which always held publishing up, and which for a short time, I would say, in the 70s, in the late 60s, most of the 70s, and the very early 80s, you could make a living as a mid-list writer in trade publishing. Your publisher would support you to get up and get going through the first, second, and third book, and then you would be off and you would, you know, produce roughly a book a year, a book every 2 years, and there will be enough in that to feed you, your family, your publisher, the booksellers, the distributors, the wholesalers, and all the rest. Now, with self-publishing, the problem with that model, and for many people it wasn't a problem at all, it worked really well. The big problem is that it's disappeared, and that, I suppose, is the heart of the original problem, which is that it was dependent on others. And of course, to some degree, we are still dependent on others. We have one very big player in the marketplace as indies, some other ancillary platforms, and things are growing. But what does seem to be different here is that you can control your own destiny more. Nobody gets to control their own destiny completely, but there's quite a substantial difference. If you're determined, you can keep going. So we see a lot of trade published authors now coming out of trade because the relationships with their publishers are not good, and they can turn around and they can rebuild themselves, their own business and their connection with their readers. And in the same way, somebody can start off not having a clue what they're doing and slowly over the years build up. And what they can also do, and I find this also very exciting, the day job can be writing related. We're seeing that more and more, that a lot of people who are, while they're building, and to the point that their book sales becomes their income, they are actually getting involved in all the many different services that Indie draws on, from editorial to formatting to, all sorts of ancillary services. Or they are coming up with a non-fiction idea, or a course-based idea, or a club-based idea, a subscription model, or something that is aligned with their mission as a writer. And so it's not exactly the same as their fiction books or their non-fiction series or whatever it is that they're writing as books, but it shares something with their reason for writing those books. And it's easier to make money that way, because selling books is hard.
Oh yeah, and when you become harder, I think, in the sort of way things go. Sorry, I can hear a lot of echo. Are you hearing that?
I'm not hearing that, no.
Okay.
Is it in your ear?
No, it's from your room, but hopefully it will be okay. Hopefully people listening won't have that problem. If you have a headset nearby, maybe grab it. But in the meantime...
you talk, I'll go get headset.
Okay. In the meantime, just reflecting on the same thing, that being creative is so important, and creating these multiple works. Because I was in New York for Thrillerfest, which we might talk about in a minute, but basically I went to the Museum of Modern Art, and when I'm in New York, and I've been to New York a number of times now for Thrillerfest, which is the sort of premium thriller convention, I go and see Van Gogh's, and I said Van Gogh, it's because the pronunciation is Van Gogh, but I've had so many Americans tell me I'm pronouncing it wrong, but if you Google it, you'll find that it's Van Gogh. But anyway, so I went to see Starry Night, which is probably my favorite, one of my favorite paintings, and I love going to see it, and it's beautiful. And it's the only painting in the Museum of Modern Art that has its own security guards, and people are standing, there's a queue of people taking selfies with this painting. Now, when he painted that, he had no idea that it would be the maybe one of the biggest paintings in the world, much later, and that people would feel so emotionally attached to this painting that they're taking selfies with it. And I love that. I love that it has its own security guards. And I was standing there thinking, surrounded by Picasso and Matisse and loads of famous people that you have at the Museum of Modern Art, thinking, we don't know which of our works, which of our words, which of our poems, what our blog posts, which of them will touch people. And there was a study that was out a couple of weeks ago on the Next Web, and we'll link to it in the show notes, about producing more. And the study basically said that creators don't know which of their works will resonate, and the important thing is creating more. So don't spend years obsessing over that one thing, but just create more, and you just never know what can happen. Now, as you spend quite a long time on your novels and your longer works, but you do a lot of poetry. So do you ever feel that way, like the poems that resonate surprise you and might have been like this to create, but the ones that hit?
Yeah, I think as authors, we're poor judges of what actually is, as you say, going to touch people. I don't like to use the word best or whatever, but what is going to have most legs, let us say. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of writing something and thinking, yeah, that wasn't bad, and then going back and going, oh my, what on earth was that? And vice versa. You know, you think that you've done something that's really awful, and actually when you read back, it's not as awful as you thought it was. We're so emotionally invested. We're very poor judges of what works and what doesn't. I really do love the create more thing, and you know, within a context, different writers, you know, different types of writing, I think, need different kind of cooking times. But I think everybody benefits when we loosen up, let go, let flow more. I would certainly like to create more. That is an aim of mine, to you know, move a bit faster than I have been moving, and to continue to do that. And I think indie authors have really challenged everybody. You know, we're all challenging each other, and sometimes that pushes us to do things that, you know, don't serve us that well, but it's well worth trying and seeing, because, you know, I was talking to an author last night at an event, which we'll talk about in a while, and she was saying, you know, that for 2 years she listened to me talking about dictation and its value, and she resisted, and then she finally did it, and she said, oh, why didn't I do it 2 years ago? You know, it has upped her productivity hugely. And you know, so that kind of thing is going on all the time. We've got to try things and see, do they work for us? And I think the fact that we all talk to each other so much now, and you know, the fact that we've all found each other in a way, because until ALLi existed, I didn't realize there were so many people who kind of went through the same sort of motions around writing as I did. I wasn't a typical writer in my old world. I wasn't like the rest of the writers around me. And I think it's been really interesting to watch the way in which all that connection and collaboration is pushing us to write more, write better, write faster. And those things are not, as some people would like to say, mutually exclusive. Definitely not.
And it's interesting as well, like what we go through as authors. So, you know, talking about what resonates, I did a podcast and I wrote an article, which I basically then read on my podcast, about going to Thrillerfest and the basically emotional roller coaster. So I was nominated for the award, and as we announced last month, I did not win the award. But what happened, because of that, I spent 5 days going through chronic anxiety, because of course the awards were the very last thing of the conference on the Saturday night when I got there on the Monday. So I had all the physical associations with anxiety, which was not pleasant, and all the way up until that moment when your name is read out and then not announced. The lovely James Scott Bell won, who is a fantastic writer, hybrid writing teacher, amazing chap. So good on Jim. But as well as that, Thrillerfest is one of these places, like we were saying, with this polarity. It's some of the biggest names in the world. Lee Charles, honoured as Thriller Master. Clive Cussler was there. You know, there were a lot of very big names in the thriller niche, and then there were a whole load of debuts who were honoured as debuts, and then there's all the people in the middle, and I always go through that sense of need for validation in that environment. And there was barely any mention of indie this year. It was quite missing. I felt there was, you know, I just had that moments of self-doubt and comparisonitis and all the things I go through, and I've had the most emails and tweets and comments on this post, because people are like, oh, I didn't know you felt that way. I thought you were always confident and always like certain about your path. And it's important to acknowledge that we all go through these moments of self-doubt about our own writing, but also about our career path. You know, I love being indie, but I often, with a book, I'm like, should I submit this? You know, should I have an agent? Should I do this with it? I don't know. So yeah, I mean, and you go through that too, right? It's not just, you know.
No, I think everybody goes through that. I think in a way, if you're not going through that, if you're not pushing yourself at that emotional edge, in a way, you're not being creative. You got to be in the places that make you anxious. And I think that's why we're attracted to this, not to get too philosophical about it, but you know, it is because we want to unpick that and understand that and grow, in a sense. I do think the anxiety lessons with age and experience and all that kind of stuff. But nobody's a machine, not even Joanna Penn. And writers are, you know, sensitive creatures by definition. If we're not sensitive, we're not going to be much of a writer. So, you know, there is that. And I think a lot of people avoid the kinds of situations that I know you make yourself do. And, you know, it's I read your piece, and it was very interesting about that kind of dual side of the writer, the part that wants to kind of just stay home, locked away in a room, in doing meditation and yoga, and, you know, not seeing anybody and just connected to the work. And then the person who actually does want to be out in the world and wants the work to be out in the world and wants the work to be read. And, you know, the only way to do that is to get out there and kind of get behind it. And I think in a way that's why indie authors are balanced, because they have to hold those two. Nobody's doing it for you. So, you know, of course, trade published writers also are put in situations, but they can blame their publisher. You know, we actually, the responsibility comes back to us, and we know that it's, you know, we're making ourselves do it, and therefore we really have to engage with it at a different level. But I'm not surprised that you got loads of tweets, because people do think you're a machine.
And I'm so not. Although I will say that today I went back to the book, and this is another on our creative side. You and I always give an update on our writing, and I had started. I'm 40,000 words into a new first book in a new series. It's fantasy, and I'm discovering that fantasy, you know, world building is a whole nother thing. And I was again full of self-doubt, and it's been 14 days since I wrote anything on this book, and I was so worried that I had forgotten it. I'd just forgotten it completely, and I was like, oh no. And then today, like, I'm feeling very happy, because today I spent 3 hours getting back into that book, and it wasn't as bad as I remember, which was a relief. And then tomorrow I'm, you know, back into the writing of that first draft. And that's the thing, after all that roller coaster, at the end of the day, what makes you feel better? And a big tip for everyone, like, if you're feeling crap, maybe go do some writing.
A radical concept.
But you can spend so long being afraid of it. Like, I was like, oh, I don't want to read this. It's just going to be awful. I'm going to feel even worse about myself because it will be terrible. And I mean, it wasn't. It was still a first draft, but it was better than I remembered. And I was like, okay, yeah, I remember this now. I can get back into it. This is great. And I wrote some notes on it and just got into it. So don't second guess the need to write. Just go write.
Oh no, definitely. Thinking about writing is a very bad idea.
Yeah, don't think about it. But I do want to ask again, kind of on this self-doubt or second guessing, or whether it comes under marketing. But you sent out an email today to your email list, which is always a fantastic email, from Orna Ross at ornaross.com, separate to your Alliance self, that you have some new covers for your Irish books, which I really like the new covers. But of course, you and I have talked about recovering books before. How many times have you recovered these books, and why again? Or are these different ones?
Oh no, I've never recovered these. This is the first time. Well, it's because I'm tipping away at number 3 in the trilogy in the background, and so my thoughts have turned to these books again, which I haven't touched for ages. And just frankly, the covers have become dated. I think they were fine when I started. It's also probably interesting that I had an image in my mind when I was writing my book, and I had a title in my mind. And the title, this was the first part of the trilogy, the title I had in my mind was After the Rising. And the image I had in my mind was a hand coming up out of, you know, the sea, the sand kind of thing, because there's a grisly murder in sinking sands, you know, and in this little Irish village. So I had that image and that title in my mind. When my publisher got this book, because it was originally trade published, their vision was so completely different. And when I took the back, I just wanted to put the title I had in my head and the image I had in my head, and I, you know, just had the creative freedom to do that. But I don't think that, you know, a few of the reviews said that the cover gave no indication really of what was in the book, and a lot of people an awful lot of people connect to the Irish dimension of that trilogy. And, you know, I get a lot of Irish American people particularly, but Irish, you know, you don't have to be Irish actually to like Ireland.
Yeah, I've read it. It was awesome, the first one.
Yeah, and so, you know, it's just rebranded it as being a bit more Irish. Also, it is a double story, so to give it's a four-generational story, so to give a sense of kind of the present and the past, and just to try and make the covers a bit more to signify more what's inside, and also to match what is now selling in that genre. Because when I started to self-publish, that genre was absolutely tiny. It was almost non-existent. And now it's
filling up.
Genre. It's bursting at the seams, and it has its conventions and everything like everybody else. So it was to try and just
do that.
Yeah, maybe.
I think there's two really interesting points here. One, the dated issue and the fact that we have the freedom to update our covers as things change. And I mean, I don't think any of us would expect in 10 years' time for our covers to be the same as they are now. It's just not likely. So, but we're so lucky, or you know, I'm grateful. I should stop saying lucky. I'm grateful that we have the freedom to do this. But the other thing is the trilogy thing, which is interesting because I did the same thing with I still don't know what they are, what I call my London psychic books or my London crime thrillers. I still can't settle on what the hell those books are. But I changed those covers after I'd written the 3, because when you've got a fuller story, it kind of gives you a sense of the book. And I'm feeling that with this fantasy. I'm just like, I don't know if I can release this first one. You know, now there's this thing that maybe we shouldn't release the first one until we have more. And I'm thinking, maybe I don't know what these books are either. So it's so interesting. And of course, you had the first thought in your head, your publisher had a thought, and now you're on a third thought that are about the same pieces of work. I mean, is this just a crazy thing we do?
Well, maybe it's just like, you know, painting your living room. You just get tired of looking at the same old cover, but it feels a bit deeper than that. And I'm interested in what you're saying about the fantasy and waiting. You know, that's what I'm doing with my nonfiction. I actually, because as I go further on into the series, I'm going back and making changes in book one. And I want, when these go out, not to be doing that when they're actually published. I want them actually out and done in that way. It's the same as I write the trilogy. I know I'm actually going to go back into the first book. Not major changes, nothing that, you know, anybody who's read the book is going to be upset by, but just things that will make the whole thing hang together as a trilogy. And it's inevitable, I think. And it's great to be able to do that. I remember studying the work of a short story writer, Frank O'Connor, and he had written, you know, he's written all his life, but he spent, you know, when he was in his 60s, he was going back and still working on stories that he had published, you know, in his 20s. He was constantly at them and kind of doing them up. And, you know, Yeats went back and redid a whole segment of his work that he had done 6 years previously, and did it, you know, they were really quite different stories by the time he had finished them the second time. And now the scholars, of course, have a great time working out which version is better and which they prefer, what he changed, what it meant, and blah, 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 blah. So if only to keep the academics busy, you know, in future life, we can do these things.
Well, it seems so interesting you say that, because I think there's this thought that, you know, the book should be set in stone, or, you know, when it goes to print, that's it. But of course, indies are changing their books all the time, even if it's just adding back matter. Or I opened up one of my books and went, oh, I just want to change the formatting a bit. And then as I went into the formatting, I was like, oh, you know, I can just see a few things. And I was like, stop it. Otherwise I'll end up rewriting the whole thing. But you
having to send it to the proofreader again, as I did.
You have to be careful. But it is a very interesting shifting. I'd love, you know, this is an idea for an article on the Alliance blog, you know, some evidence of other authors who people, you know, like you're saying with Yeats, evidence that this is not the first time authors have done this, like, you know, that other name authors have done this rewriting over time, so that there really is no monolithic idea.
No, I think it was, you know, it was a function of the printing press as it existed. Authors were always doing this. Maybe not every author, maybe it's something that only certain authors do. I'm not sure about that. But I know it definitely used to happen. But of course, your publisher wouldn't give you another print run until you had earned out on your first print run, and then changes would be made often for a second edition, even for fiction, and not necessarily, you know, but if the author wanted, that was certainly something that did happen. And obviously on non-fiction there will be updates and all sorts,
new versions,
you know, new versions, new editions, and so on. But the idea that a book is set in stone has always been a bit of an exaggeration, but now it's becoming just more and more and more fluid. So it's you know, it's a writer's dream, it's a librarian and publisher's nightmare, I think. Yeah.
That's true. Okay, so on just kind of coming back to some of the other things going on, getting your self-published book into bookstores, the book by the Alliance, Debbie Young, obviously, and you as editor of the series, is out now. And what are the thoughts on bookstores? I mean, it was interesting. I've been to a few conferences this year, and for the first time, I've had one of them actually order books from Ingram and have them in the store. That at Crime Fest, which was awesome. Thrillerfest, they asked me to bring copies, but they said please bring copies, and then they did all the forms, and then when they sold, I got money and all of that. So they were very good. And then another conference just like, no, you're self-published, go away. So what is the upshot of bookstores right now, do you think, or are we hardcore print on demand?
Yeah, I think we can be both now. I suppose that's the biggest development, that bookstores can now, with iPage in Australia and Canada and the UK and spreading out to more countries. That's Ingram's way, if you like, of letting the bookstores know that your book exists. With that in place now, bookstores can order POD. However, POD is an expensive way to get books, and that makes our books not that competitive when compared to trade publishing. So there needs to be a reason why a reader would want to pay that bit extra. But the bookstore's book, I suppose, was only really possible this year because of a few developments like that, which is making it easier. And also we are finding, we have had a campaign, Authors for Bookstores, for a while now, whereby we're trying to enable booksellers to see that indie authors and indie bookstores can come together in a useful way that is actually mutually beneficial. And we're definitely seeing doors more open to that idea than before. And big chain here in the UK, Waterstones, had kind of made it a head office decision as to whether self-published books would go in or not. Now that power has been given back to the store, the individual store manager in a particular area. And there's just generally, all around the track, more acceptance. And so for those writers who want to see their books in bookstores, now we're completely aware that there are loads of writers who don't care about this at all. They're just happy to be online. When we're saying bookstores here, we're talking about brick bookstores on the high street. And for those who want that to happen, the book is a guideline to that as to how you can make it happen. And we have lots of members who are making it happen in different ways. For some, it might just be the local store is now able to order some copies of their books. You can do an event at your local store. You can bring in a few books on consignment or whatever. But some people are beginning to approach book selling quite seriously. And I'm going to do a personal experiment later on this year with a non-fiction book and just see what is possible.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And coming back to Thrillerfest, they had a session, and again, lots more notes on my blog, but a group who did a study a couple of years ago followed up that study, and they looked at discoverability. And the actual quote, I didn't quote too much because, I was taking handwritten notes, but they actually said, discovery is broken. And they talked about how readers discover a book. Now, it's funny because from the reader perspective, discovery is not broken. I don't ever have any problem finding a book, and I'm surrounded, and my Kindle is surrounded by too many books for me to possibly read as a reader. But for us as authors, the discovery is broken. But what was so fascinating is 2 years ago they presented it, and 40% of books bought in the last 30 days were from physical bookstores. And this year, 2 years later, 20% of books were discovered in physical bookstores. And there was almost an audible gasp in the room at this, because most traditionally published authors, the physical bookstore is the cornerstone of the business model. And of course, this was in America, and the study was done in America. And of course, it was a study, and they probably had a certain demographic, blah, blah, blah. But that shift was just so, so significant. And they talked about physical retail being in decline. 19% of discovery was author marketing, and 11% recommendations, 11% digital marketing. So I don't know how they kind of split this out. 10% e-promotions and 8% e-tailer browsing. Now, personally, I put author marketing, digital marketing, e-promotions, and e-tailer browsing in the same bucket.
All called digital marketing.
Yeah, which would be digital marketing, and that is around which is basically around 40 to 50% of discovery there is essentially online. Now, if they had literally put physical bookstore versus online, then I think they would have, it would have at least been, 70-30 to online with what they split out. So this was fascinating. I also visited the Amazon bookstore and the Barnes & Noble, the Amazon bookstore on Columbus Circle, which is quite upmarket, and then the Barnes & Noble on Fifth Avenue, which again is upmarket shopping in New York. And I was just quite saddened by the Barnes & Noble, and they made it hard to even buy a book, let alone discover a book in the store, whereas actually the Amazon store was very well set out, very integrated with Goodreads, easy to buy, and entirely directed towards getting people on Prime and into devices. So it was so interesting to kind of feel this physical environment happening. And then a couple of other things have happened this week. Just one thing is that the biggest digital streaming song ever in the whole world has, did you see this week? It was a Spanish language song by a sort of guys in their 40s that no one had ever heard of, and yet had become this huge streaming hit in Latin America, and thus has taken over. And I found the congruence of these two things amazing, and just how much of the world is going discovery through digital and consumption through digital, and what that will mean for us, those of us who are comfortable with digital. I love bookstores, yes, but this has got to be the future.
Well, it's not just books. Physical shopping is deteriorating for almost every sector. And I think there's something happening in physical shopping that is interesting for us to think about. And it's back to this idea that, a book is a very cheap product. Books are actually too cheap in lots of countries, the UK being one of them, and the US. Other countries value their books more, and readers are prepared to spend more on a paperback and significantly more on a hardback. But wherever you look, it's not an expensive product at all. Writing can be delivered in more premium ways. And I think what's happening in physical shopping is, it's really splitting between the bargain basement sort of thing and the premium goods. And I think there's always a market for premium, and books should be premium because they are bought by people who buy premium. That is their kind of, I don't know the proper marketing terms for these things, but the buying demographic are educated, good jobs, blah, 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 blah. So I think it's time for us to, really break this open and think about ways in which our words can be sold that is not confined to the book, as we have, had it to date. Because also in an environment where anybody can create a digital product and anybody can market a digital product with a very small budget, the authority that was invested in a book when it was something, a more scarce commodity is slowly kind of dwindling away. And we have to, as writers, I don't think discoverability is a good word for us, because I don't think we, just hanging around waiting to be discovered isn't going to do it. It's not how we think about it. Discoverability, again, is a sort of a publishing term that is around newspapers and bookstores and trade publishers. For authors, it's not about discoverability so much as, creating your readership and being worth reading, and all of these kinds of things, and then matching your delivery mechanism which includes the way you will shape up your words and put them out into the world, and then how they will reach your reader and so on. All of this needs to be rethought about, and we're not going far enough at all, I think, in terms of breaking the whole thing open. We're still very caught between the square box that is the codex, you know, the text, the book, and it's time to kind of, yeah, burst that open a bit, I think, with a bit of lateral thinking. And I'd love to see somebody doing that, and maybe we will.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We always get excited about what's happening, and I think looking at the music industry is so interesting because, of course, they are ahead of us in this digital market. So I'm kind of looking at that. The other thing in the news that I think is interesting about that kind of well, kind of now, but also future, and whether things are a bit broken, is the David Gochran, who obviously is, you know, wonderful reporter and very activist on these things, reporting about KU scammers breaking the KU store, talking about click farming. And I think, you know, I know a lot of people would have seen this, a number of books, and talking about the weekend, you know, when people aren't watching at head office or something, and, you know, paying for clicks and getting page reads, and whether this is affecting people. It's a big thing on keyboards. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there will always be people who are trying to scam the best intentions. But a while back, you know, we had this discussion of the back on the sock puppet days, probably a couple of years ago now. We talked about the kind of ethical author and maintaining, you know, so how do we balance the pushing into the boundaries of new things and taking advantage of new technology, and then also remembering, you know, or trying to stay on the side of ethical?
It is a balancing act, isn't it? It's a number of our campaigns are being kind of dusted up and brushed up at the moment. Summer is always a time for that, looking at how we're going to handle them in the years kind of going ahead. And I think David's piece has stirred people up, and John Doppler and I were talking about ethical author and looking at it and seeing that within, you know, we had a long sort of list of things that we were asking authors to say if they want to say, I am an ethical author, what they would sign up to, and click farms didn't even come into it then. So it's interesting. So we're kind of revising some of that, and we have a new logo and we have a new badge and all of that, not just exclusively around this, but it's one of the things that has changed. And it's difficult. I mean, I was talking to an author who said, you know, I did that. I didn't know there was anything wrong with doing that. I thought that was just like marketing. And, you know, yeah, I can totally see how that will be. And then I'm sure there are people who would say, well, you know, I don't see anything unethical about that whatsoever. Somebody else will draw their line somewhere else. But yeah, I think it is important. With creative freedom and control, there comes a responsibility, you know, and I think we can't have our cake and eat it. So we do have to think about what's right and what's fair, and, you know, misrepresenting readership by buying it is, well, you know, it has happened in the book industry always, because front of store placement is another form of doing that. It's just a different way to do it. So, you know, these are they're 40, 50, 60 shades of gray around what it is to be an ethical author. But the point is, I guess, is that we all need to think about it and have good reasons for doing what we do and being able to stand over what we do. So if we're hiding something, if we're doing something that we would prefer other people didn't know about, then chances are we shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, it is so interesting. And it was funny because one of the panels that had some, again, really big names on, you know, multi New York Times best-selling authors, this guy said, you know what, when my hardback books come out, I have people in every, because there are New York Times reporting bookstores, and he admitted it on this panel in front of hundreds of people. I send people to those reporting stores on day one to buy my hardback books in order to affect the rankings. And then, like 2 seconds later, he goes, oh, and then those self-published authors who go and get their fans to post reviews on day one of their book launch. And I was sitting there going, what? You just you just admitted this yourself. And he did not see the connection. Now, both of those things I don't actually consider unethical. I actually think both of those things are asking your legitimate fans to go buy your book on day one and post a review. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. The click farms, yeah, I do see something wrong with that. And just to remind everyone, you know, that the ALLi has the watchdog service, and whenever I get people pitching me every day, and I say, my first question is, are you a partner member of the Alliance of Independent Authors? Or can you go and look on I check them out on the watchdog, and if they're not there, I'll email John Doppler, maybe you could check these people out. So, I mean, it must be a constant job now, checking out who is valid and who's not, and have people move back and forwards over that line.
Yeah, and we also work with people. I mean, if they genuinely want to, it's not our job to give free consultancy to services, but we do end up doing exactly that. If somebody is, means well and has got it wrong. So yeah, the watchdog and the partner membership services area has always taken a lot of our resources and time. But I think it's really important because we are only as good as our services, and we have definitely seen a sort of author pressure that has been there, and the highlighting of not good services and the promotion of people who are doing a good job is changing what's available now when somebody decides that they want to self-publish. They're not as likely. It's still possible because it's still, some bad actors still dominate the Google stream, but it's far more likely that they will also, if they Google a bad service, number one will be the company, and number two will be the ALLi report on the company. So yeah, and John does an amazing job. He is absolutely fantastic, and Jim also, and all the people who feed into that desk: Victoria Strauss, David Cochran, Mick Rooney, Bengali, sometimes yourself. There's lots of members as well. It's collective power that makes it possible to change things, and we are definitely seeing that in that arena.
And of course that we've seen some discussion in some groups about the value of the Alliance of Independent Authors, and I think this is a really important part. This is not a Facebook group, this is not a paid like course. This is a professional organization for people who are taking this seriously to come together and be stronger together, right? I mean, that's your vision for this group, group, this alliance.
This alliance, yes. No, that's absolutely it. And the power is in the membership. It's just the most incredible group of writers who are so generous with their time and so clued in to what it is to be indie and how being an indie author is changing everything in the world of words, and the world of words is one of the most important worlds in the world. So yeah, people sometimes get confused. They don't understand that what a writers association even is. Often, if you haven't encountered a writers association, you don't know what it is or what it does, and perhaps question the value for that reason. And then of course there are lots of writers that aren't joiners and don't need an association, and I mean, this is the indie world, so that's absolutely great too. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, for those who do feel it's important to band together and who believe in the power of the collective and of the grassroots sort of power from down up rather than up down, then it works, and hopefully will work more as time goes on.
Yeah, now we're almost out of time, but there is another interesting thing that happened just last night as we talk. You were at the Amazon Kindle Storyteller Awards, and maybe tell us about what lessons learned from that since you were involved.
Yeah, I had the honor of being one of the judges for the award, and it's a very unusual award in publishing because it well, first of all, it's a huge prize of a huge financial prize in terms of cash, £20,000, pounds, but also in terms of, the financial prize of having marketing on the Amazon store behind your book. And then there was also all sorts of other lovely things, connecting with a mentor, really a completely life-changing prize. And it was very interesting also because it is unique in publishing prizes in being reader driven. So all of the books were nominated. First of all, they had to be entered by the author or somebody representing the author. And then after that, it was a combination of how many reviews did they get in that time, and what were the sales like, and what kind of rose up to attention in that time. So 6 extremely diverse books. I mean, they couldn't have been more different. 6 books, I think, 5 of them in genre that I rarely read. So that was really interesting. I felt like I got a real overview of indie writing in a different sort of way, just by being part of it, not only with the 6 shortlisted books, but just observing the scene and how they came through and so on. And we had a clear winner, and a very experienced writer, David Ledbetter, and The Relic Hunters is the name of the book, and it is, I think you're familiar with his work, you were saying?
Yeah, he's a thriller writer, absolutely, and has a lot of books. So I mean, in a way, I had thought it was a discovery for new writing, but actually, it seemed like, he's a very experienced writer with an email list and all of that. So do you think it was about discovery, or was it about finding someone commercial?
I don't think it was about, and I too thought when I agreed to judge it, I was expecting a new voice, somebody, that we hadn't heard from before in indie was going to kind of rise up through the ranks. So I thought it was going to be only, your first time publishing that will be allowed to enter. But that wasn't what was the aim here, was to find really good storytellers. So people who told stories to the satisfaction of their readers. And so a few of the books, it was their first time maybe under that particular pen name. Nobody that was there, as far as I can write, nobody except maybe Jono, who was the guy who windsurfed around the UK. One of them was a non-fiction book about a windsurfer who did this crazy trip, and really, really interesting and is now couldn't make it to the award ceremony last night, but appeared on video from windsurfing around Europe, appeared from his
windsurfer, awesome,
tight while he talked to us on the camera. It was great. But apart from him, everybody was an experienced writer. They had, worked in other genre or whatever. So that was interesting as well. And you're trying to compare books that are just completely different, and that was very challenging. It was very interesting, the discussions that we had among the judges as well. So all in all, it was super interesting. I think there may be some changes to the competition for next time out. The first time you do anything is always a bit of a learning experience. But a very worthy winner. And one thing David talked about, his job before that was he worked in a timber factory and wrote his way out of that and now into this kind of, and he was doing extremely well anyway, even before he got this. And so he has kind of what we were talking about at the start. He's written his way up the ladder, and now this has happened, and he'll go into stratosphere from here, I assume.
Yeah, which is, it's so interesting. At the end of the day, it all comes back to writing the next thing and seeing what happens, and you just, keep putting yourself out there. It always does come down to the same thing, like keep creating. And I'm grateful, we're lucky that this is what we enjoy doing, and it is possible to make a living from it. So anything else you want to add, or anything that's coming up with the Alliance?
No, we're still in summer mode, tidying up and would be tidying up everything. It's like we have, 3 conferences and all the things that go on during the year, and then the summer comes and everything's in disarray and all needs to be kind of put back into place.
And then suddenly it's Frankfurt again, and you're just like, what the hell happened?
Exactly. So we have another few weeks before we have to start thinking about Frankfurt Book Fair and what's coming up in the autumn. But what about you?
Well, I'm just looking for our next show because I'm on a walking holiday when we're meant to do our next show. But there will be another show.
Yes.
It won't be the last Tuesday of the month, but we will be doing another show, and we'll be talking about everything. So I guess we should say happy creating, happy everything, publishing, marketing, creative entrepreneurialness.
Absolutely, and keep the faith and keep writing.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.